Welcome to I Like Beer, the book club, where we discuss great books while drinking a beer. That's it, beer and a book. Couple of friends. I'm your host, Jeff Spanier. With me is the co-host of I Like Beer, the podcast, affectionately nicknamed The Talent, Jeff Riccitelli.
Yeah, happy to be back with another good book and some beers and to see you guys.
Our book and beer friend, author, Ryan Woldt.
Author is a strong term, but I appreciate you using it, guys. Thank you so much.
2 books now.
Well, and there's a few others out there that I don't let anyone know about. So you got to really search for them.
Deep dives.
Okay.
Yeah.
You're on it, talent.
I'll be looking. I'm going to find the Ryan Woldt fan club and see what those ones where you can get those early copies.
I'll know when you find it when my phone stops ringing. No more invites over to the book club.
On the I Like Beer, the podcast, we've returned to the studio, in fact, a brand new studio, and we've been able to head back out on field trips. So that's been a lot of fun. What have you been up to, Ryan, and where can people find you?
Well, there's just so many things. I'm so tired all the time. But the biggest things that I'm working on right now is I have a new book coming out, Future Eli and Jane, which is the follow-up to Eli and Jane. Which we are just started taking pre-orders. I got my very first 2 pre-orders today from one of my co-hosts here, which I couldn't think of enough for.
Yeah, I'm just telling you guys, get it before it sells out. That's the word. That's what I'm putting out to everybody.
He's the only person I've ever known who thought a pre-order could sell out, so that made me feel pretty good about the audience.
It's all about marketing. Get it before it sells out.
Yeah. We do.
But yeah, so I'm doing that. And you can find that. You can follow my Twitter or Instagram at One Wildlife Co. or online onewildlifeco.com.
And where are things at with Roast West Coast?
Oh boy, the Coffee Podcast season 3 is on the way. We just started scheduling guests. We've got some great guests this season from Nostalgia Coffee Roasters, Bird Rocks founders. Interim, which is a new shop here in Carlsbad, which actually you mentioned to me and turned me on to. So going to be a lot of great guests, and that'll launch. The first shows will be dropping the first week of October, and that's roastwestcoast.com if anyone wants to go back and listen to all the old shows. And I think that's probably my last shameless plug for the day, guys.
Jeff and I bonded years ago over a fondness for craft beer and telling stories, and in fact, we spent a lot of time drinking beer and talking about books and thought we were the only ones until we met Ryan and learned there was at least one more kindred soul. We figured there must be somebody else out there. So we created I Like Beer, the book club. Once a month, we join Powers. I used to say intellectual powers, but Ryan gets Scott. So just join Powers.
Superpowers.
Book,
okay.
Share a beer, rotating the host based on who's chosen the book. Talent's turn this month, and the book is Barbarian Days by William Finnegan. But before we turn the first page, let's find out what we're drinking. Talent, what do you got?
Well, I chose something kind of tied in with this. It's from a brewery up in Salmon, Washington, White Salmon, Washington, called Everybody's Brewing, and it's called 3 Sport Day Lifestyle Pilsner. It's nice and light for an afternoon, but I also felt like it tied a little bit in with the book here. If you're going out there and you're going to try and get 3 sports in a day, you want to have something that's going to, you don't want to be drinking something too heavy.
And Ryan,
and I thought about going with a theme, but I decided to go with the larger life theme that maybe the book encompasses. And I am drinking a Vax On, Vax Off from Ale Asylum Brewing in Madison, Wisconsin. And it's my moment to tell everyone, just go get vaccinated.
There you go. Yeah.
It's going to be fine. Just do it.
Agreed. You shared many beers with us last weekend, including that one. I think that was Talent's absolute favorite of the.
Oh, it was great. Yeah, it was fantastic.
It's just got an incredible smell to it. And Ale Asylum is kind of they're like the Stone Brewing of Madison, Wisconsin. They've been around forever. They've always been consistent. They led the charge and parted the seas for everyone else to come behind them. I think when they started, there was maybe 1 or 2 other craft breweries in the area. And now I think there's 28 or 29 in that county alone. So they definitely have been around my entire craft beer drinking life. So shout out to them, Ale Asylum.
Excellent choices. I have Pizza Port's California Honey Blonde Ale. I was looking over some different Pizza Ports because I wanted the surfer image for the picture with the book, thinking about the Instagram all the time. Man, my age, but I was. And I had to go with the California Blonde Ale, one, because I love this beer, but two, because it had the old-fashioned woody with the longboards on it. And this book takes us back to those kind of early days of surfing becoming a lifestyle and something that wasn't just, if you're in Hawaii, you knew and no one else did.
Yeah.
Well, and I would almost say, I think the book kind of starts in the 60s, if I recall, right? And it's this time where before surfing was cool, and there's this wavering back and forth throughout the whole book of where he is at in that level of coolness and what he thinks of other people who either are or are not surfers. At some points, they're his heroes and his idols, and he wants to be like that. And at another point, he's frustrated that more people are enjoying surfing. And at other points, he's like the lower guy in the totem pole. And it's interesting to see how his emotional connection to the sport changes through time.
Agreed. Well, cheers.
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 Let's talk about this book. Jeff, tell us a little bit about the book and why you picked it.
So I picked this book. It's actually called Barbarian Days, A Surfing Life. So those of you that got caught up, don't get caught up on the title Barbarian Days. It's a Barbarian Days, A Surfing Life. And it was recommended to me by my dad, actually, and stuff like that, who's an avid surfer. Even to this day, will surf every day, is out on the cliffs checking out the waves every day. And so he read this book and was like, hey, I think you'll enjoy it. And so I looked it over and I've always liked a good adventure story. Again, it's one of those things where it's people that are doing something that maybe you would love to do, but maybe you're never going to get around to doing that kind of stuff. So this was kind of it's like that. What was the one, the the Hanky's, his book, right? About waking up on the Appalachian trails, similar that way, and so that's pretty much why I picked it. I think it's an interesting one because as I started getting into it a little bit, I found, I actually won the Pulitzer Prize. So it's a highly acclaimed book in terms of, the story itself. That the author actually is a well-known author. He writes for the New Yorker. So again, if you start back at the beginning and where he started, you wouldn't never think that that's where he's going or the trajectory he's on. But yeah, it's just, I guess at its heart, it's kind of a old school adventure story, but at the same point, it's got a lot about a coming of age in terms of also figuring out your place in the world and how you fit into it. So it kind of goes that way. I did a little more research today on it, and actually, it looks like he wrote originally a two-part article in the New Yorker called "Playing Doc's Games" that kind of really focused on the character or the individual. He's not a character because he's a real life person, but Doc Renneker in San Francisco, and kind of alluded to in that, hey, some of my other adventures, and so then that evolved into this book.
Excellent. Well, you get to lead the discussion. You pick the book. You're in charge of guiding Ryan.
Okay, well, I'll give it a shot, but I feel like this is a tough one just because it's not like one of those ones. Well, let's talk about the main characters. Yes, as in Doc from Cannery Row, exactly, but that kind of thing. But I guess in general, before to kind of get into some stuff is kind of what was your overall take on the book? Because I think there's a lot to digest in this book if you go at it, whether you're taking it as an adventure story, which obviously there was many of that, or you're taking it as a like some of the philosophical journeys that this guy went through, or the different things he's gone through. Just kind of what your overall take on the book was.
Well, I can jump in a little bit and just say that it's important to note that this is a thick book with small type. It's very long, and not in a bad way. Just it's dense, and there's a lot packed into this book. Probably more than we'll be able to talk about today. But I think I mentioned this once before. But I read this book once a few years back, and it reminded me of reading Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance because it felt like there was some sort of bigger picture lessons that I was supposed to be learning while also focusing on these small, intimate details of the story and of the life. And it just switches out surfing for motorcycle maintenance. And at the same time, there's a nice is the wrong word. There's a level of kind of self-aggrandizing or pretension or that he tries to disguise through deprecation. But it's definitely there for me, at least when I read it. I think I read my very first note is on the very first page. And the very first sentence, it says, "I had never thought of myself as a sheltered child." And I wrote, which feels like how every self-aggrandizing memoir starts. I didn't think I was, but here we are.
I found myself in places where he did that, where he would not just like swerve over the line between, and this is a New Yorker thing, between being erudite and then pedantic. I thought Ryan's rolling his eyes right here. And then I started rolling my eyes without your help.
There wasn't an eye roll. I had an itch and, I reached for it. It's very important to him that we know that he has a very good vocabulary, which is very much a New Yorker concept to me.
Yes, and well-read.
Mm-hmm.
He wants to make sure we're well-read. He would move that into discussions and even talk about, at 13 or 14, Stephen Dedalus being his literary hero and how he lived out his life as close as he could, of course. And what did he say about, Ireland? LA could never quite be a substitute for Ireland. No, not quite.
No.
But he also did in a way that he's laughing at himself, but simultaneously wants to check in with you to make sure you noticed how clever that was. I appreciated a lot of the stylistic choices he made. I did enjoy the book, just to kind of give it that overview you're asking for, Jeff. Something I was waiting for, and then in my reread of it, because I did give it sort of a going back through my notes the last couple of days. The first part of his book's his journey around the world, sort of. As a very young man, and he has lots of reasons, maybe we'll get into some of those, why he feels that's something he needs to do, but it seems like the very definition of this pointless, errandless quest. Like, he doesn't really know why he's doing it. And I kept thinking that was going to be revealed, and I think maybe he thought it would kind of open up to him why he's chasing waves and why he's traveling around and why he's so gung-ho to do this. And I think the book as a whole has a parallel inquiry where it sort of reads like a confessional, like he's trying to confess something, but I'm never quite sure what it is he's trying to get off his chest. Maybe it's some of that Catholic guilty he does mention, like he feels guilty about certain things and he can't quite tell us what they are. But it did kind of read like he doesn't know either. That I very much liked about it.
Well, I think it's somewhat on, like, again, if you've read, you read books like this where someone could be someone that's climbing mountains, right? Or someone that's doing these types of activities, is that it's an obsession, right? There's no doubt about it. It becomes an obsession or an addiction to them. And so I think that's also kind of an interesting, because maybe he's trying to make sense of that obsession there, in terms of that. But it's also one of those things where I think that's what's somewhat intriguing for someone like me, because I'm looking at it and go, why don't you just stop? Or you don't need to go here, or, that kind of a thing. But that's not in his DNA or his makeup, or at least it wasn't at the time. And then what I found really interesting is you would think, as he, moves into the later part of the book and where he's married now and has a kid, and now you would really think, okay, now you have some reasons to stop. And yet at the same point, it's still like, well, I'm still going to, I'm still going to take some of these trips and do some of this stuff. So I find that interesting, because, like I said, it's different than how I've led my life. But I know plenty of people who kind of follow that obsession, or that, the other term I saw used was a beautiful addiction. And things that they do.
He says at one point that he's traveling around with his friend Brian, Salvadori, I believe, and they have very different personalities. And on page 203, it says, surfers have a perfection habit, the perfect wave, etc. There's no such thing. Brian had no interest in perfection. It seemed to me, and his indifference represented among the surfers I've known a rare degree of realism, maturity, and philosophical appreciation of what waves are. I didn't have much interest in perfection myself, more than he did, though.
Yeah,
that was one of those places that almost addictive personality of, we will find the right wave. We'll stay out here 6 hours. We're freezing. but that next set looks great. And I like the way he summed that up with, I didn't really have a perfection chimera, I think he said, myself. Well, more than he did, though.
Well, and he does do this thing where he references his own inability to grow up kind of continuously throughout the book. And he's writing the book reflectively and saying, I knew at the time that I should have been at a different point in my life, but I wasn't. And there's, I think on my page 143, I underlined this note where it says, why, for example, did it always seem to be receding as a concept, even as we got older? And he's talking about adulthood there as a concept that was receding. And I actually wrote a note that I feel this. I recently turned a older decade and started, you start thinking about where you expected to be at this point in your life. And you start going, well, how did this happen? When I was a kid, my parents at this age had everything figured out. I know that they did.
Right.
But now I'm that age and you go, well, wait, maybe they were just as lost as I am now, or maybe they were, hadn't figured things out. And with this book, one thing that I found frustrating was, and we didn't mention this, but he does start when he's young, and he's kind of, a lot of the early days starts where he's in school, either as a young person in Southern California or in Hawaii. And he gives off the implication that they were fairly, not low class, but they certainly weren't wealthy or well off. And there was definitely not a lot of oversight of his youth. He never really talks about when his family kind of moved into maybe an upper class sort of lifestyle as a whole. And he seems like he kind of, with his first journey, tried to separate himself from them to some extent. He was off living and putting himself in dangerous situations and living a very, day-to-day life of surfing and, paying for fish, by the nickel, or so to speak.
Right.
But he also vaguely references, at least vaguely until the end, that his parents had started their own movie production company that was very successful, and they are in the in crowd in Hollywood. And, his dad owns a sailboat and they're sailing. And so it's definitely doesn't seem like he came from, they might have started off in a lower class, but they certainly didn't stay that way. And he was kind of putting himself into this impoverished situation almost to pursue the waves as like a rite of passage. But there is something, I'm not quite sure where I'm going, other than to say there's something to be said for knowing that there's this kind of fallback into this family on the backside. And that I think he smartly doesn't really reference that a lot to take you out of his story.
Other than when he will say he didn't want, he knew he could make a phone call and be home, but he didn't want it. And then we see him go through times of near starvation, hospitalization.
Yeah, for malaria. Yeah.
But it almost, it seems like he's punishing himself. Like this is what I want, and this is what I deserve. There's something of the martyr in him, I think, at least in the way he told the story, which adds to the adventure part of the story a lot, because I really like those parts. But there was a bit of the martyr in there where, I wasn't going home. I said I was going to come back the other way, and I was going to travel around the world. So if I starved, I starved.
Well, but he doesn't seem to have a reason for his martyrdom. And that's there doesn't seem to be any particular reason why he should be martyred, or why he would be in that role, or who would look at him in that regard, other than the people he's engaging with in Indonesia or Fiji or Teravaru, and who are kind of looking at him like, you have like the key to the city back there. What are you doing here, you idiot? And he tries to explain it as an itch that he just can't scratch to some extent.
Yeah, on page 96, he says, alluding to the adventure he's going on, chasing waves in a dedicated way was both profoundly egocentric and selfless, dynamic and ascetic, radical in its rejection of the values of duty and conventional achievement. Surfing was my escape route. And he's talking about in the late 60s and political upheaval, and feeling that he had a civic duty to stand with some of these liberal causes. but hitting the waves was the escape valve that was both kind of saving him and giving him an out, I guess.
Sure. He writes on page 320 that there's a note there that I'm interested in people's response to it. A lot of cancer patients and survivors report that they never really lived until they got cancer, and that forced them to face things and to experience life more intensely. And I think that becomes a question that a lot of people battle with, which is, can I really be living and feeling if I'm not suffering? And you mentioned Catholic guilt, but I grew up fairly religious, and I certainly wonder about those relationships. You know, you start to go, well, if everything is going well and I'm comfortable, then something must be wrong.
He seems to have that need. I guess one of the things I wrote down is that if there's a theme from the book or from the parts of his life or the way he decides to share his life, it would be that constant fear. Fear is a constant, but not that Hemingway fictional style of conquering fears. Like, this is what I'm afraid of, therefore I will go shoot a lion. Now I'm afraid of this, I will go wrestle an alligator. I'm afraid of women, I will now conquer women. It's not that at all. It's just him seeming to find himself over and over again afraid, questioning his own sanity and his own physical safety and why he's doing something or why he does things. That was certainly a pattern that showed up over and over from his fights in middle school all the way to saying I'm too old, you know, his Danny Glover moments of I'm too old for this shit.
Yeah.
Do you, either of you guys surf?
I have surfed. I am not a surfer.
So I did a lot when I was younger, growing up, and that's, I think, for me, the part that I enjoyed the most about the book was the adventure and the places he went and the stuff he did at the time he did. I just thought that was so monumental. You know, he basically went and, you know, nowadays I think obviously you take it for granted there are people that can go and surf all over the world. And there are companies that will take you there and all that kind of stuff. I mean, the time he did it, it was all on him, right? And I mean, or the one contact he can make, or how could you figure out how to do that, or how could you bribe the locals to then let you stay there so then they can go, you know. And so I was going back through it today, and when you start looking at the places that he surfed in terms of things like in not just places, but like in Fiji, Indonesia, all those places. So he cloud break Tavrua. He was probably one of the first 2 or 3 people to surf that place, and you know, it's become a like a destination spot, like where that's like a bucket list place for people to go surf. Both those places are Jeffreys Bay and South Africa is another one as well. All over Australia, not to mention, you know, he started off with Hawaii. And then I think the other thing that's kind of amazing to me with him is he's willing to he goes and has all those great places, and then he has a long time up in San Francisco, which isn't really renowned as but he got really into surfing San Francisco, and that can be a very gnarly place to surf for a variety of reasons, not to mention just the cold water, but also the fact that a lot of great white sharks up in that area and that kind of stuff. So I thought that for me was really, there was a lot of things that I went, oh my gosh, that's really amazing. You know, there was one it's funny because he talked about it on, I was looking because you said page 96, but I put page 97, but he was talking about the surfing guide to Southern California. And I remember that being like at my house, like on a table when I was a kid, and you'd look through it and it would tell you all the breaks up and down Southern California and where you could go. And so I thought that was really cool. One of my dad's best friends was name dropped on page 74, Bob Carlson from Ventura. So those were all things to me that were really cool, that I really enjoyed that adventure part of it. He did start he would lose me at times on some of the, like, again, the waxing philosophical and that kind of stuff. So I feel like, as you said, it's a lengthy book with small writing. I think you could have done it with a few less pages, but I guess it's his memoir, so you do what you're going to do. But that part I really did enjoy. It would be interesting to see and talk to someone who has kind of led that lifestyle all the way through from say, you know, even where they were in middle school, high school, started surfing, and has gone on and actually done trips and that kind of stuff to see what their take on it. Because like I said, that I think the biggest thing that's amazing to me is the time he did it. At the time he did it, it was all self-created. Not there, and it's pretty amazing that the places and stuff that he went on those trips.
His ability to explain how a wave works. I grew up in a beach town with Jeff, and while I didn't surf regularly in any way, I did body surf and body board and swim in the ocean daily in the summer. And so I've had enough time around waves, and I've gone to waves, specifically up in Hawaii, where I had no business on that beach. There were people body surfing it. I shouldn't have been body surfing. And it took me all of 10 minutes to figure that out. But his ability to explain the pull of the wave, or the building of the wave, or sets coming in, or what they feel like when you drop down into them, I thought was exceptional. For the surfing nuggets, there's plenty of them.
Yeah.
If you're not a surfer, I imagine maybe there's more than you care. Like, didn't we just ride this wave? No. That one was in Fiji.
Right.
And that one broke to the left. This one's breaking to the right. There was some of that. If you are looking for those golden moments of surfing, there's plenty of them. If that's something that was leaving you kind of out of the conversation, I could see that maybe there were too many of them.
Yeah. But I like another one part I just kind of clicked back on me, like he was doing where he was, following swells and stuff to try and predict, hey, when the waves were going to break. I think a lot of that was in certain areas, but I mean, that's something now you just click on an app, and an app will tell you, hey, the waves are going to be breaking at this spot at this time. And, it's a thing that people do and chase waves all over the world because of the technology. So again, it was very impressive that he was doing that back when, I mean, I don't know. I guess you got out charts and, whatever the newspaper. I mean, it's like, it wasn't as easy as just clicking a button on the computer or an app. So,
but he seems.
Well, when Jeff and I grew up, we'd turn on the radio first thing in the morning, and they would tell you on the radio what beaches were breaking, what way, what were the swells like, when would they clean out, or when would they get better. And reading this book made me realize, so that seemed pretty new in the early 80s. And I realized how much that must have ticked off all the local regular surfers, broadcasting to all us amateurs.
Yeah.
Well, and now you can literally call up live video feeds, on your phone of a break if you wanted to. One thing I think tax onto this concept really well is, it really, for anyone who is interested in this book, it really is a surfing memoir. It does touch on all these other things, but William Finnegan, the author, becomes a legitimate journalist who is going into war zones and doing all these other things. And those could have been their own sort of memoir, but it almost feels like this was his way of disassociating with that. And he kind of wants credit for continuing it. And I'm not sure that he knows he wants it, but he does write. He's talking about being slammed underwater and being held down to the point where he can't breathe anymore. And then he goes off into kind of a philosophical bent where he says, is perseverance rewarded? Is it even recorded? And it was almost kind of like all that other work he was doing in his life, telling stories and sharing what was happening during apartheid or in war-torn countries. None of that mattered. What he wanted to know is if somebody was paying attention to the suffering he was going through in the waves. And it just really struck me as an interesting concept of the note I wrote to myself was, by whom? Who does he want to record this? Is it his parents? Is it God? Is it, the world? Is it a fame quest? It doesn't seem like it, because it seems like he avoids those opportunities if they come about. And I really don't know. And so I would ask, does it matter if our lives are recorded? I mean, we're doing this podcast, we're putting ourselves on tape, in perpetuity to some extent. Is that part of the appeal?
Right. And the ability to communicate a story and hope that it resonates with someone. So, he talks quite a bit, and Jeff and I grew up with this competitive surfing versus sort of his personal surfing, which is somewhere between daredevil and spiritual and everything in between. But both versions, and he does a lot of talking about the difference, which I thought also was really interesting.
Right.
But he sees both of them as audience driven. Like, dude, did you see the wave I caught?
Right. He has that one where he cocks out. Yeah.
Friends on shore that didn't go out. Did you see me catch that? And he talks very openly about the need to have an audience, which I think fits to Ryan's point. who saw this, who heard it, who's listening. You're hoping to be seen, whether you're a competitive surfer being judged for your marks or you're just out on the beach. Even when he's alone, he said he'd look and he'd see fishermen clapping or some old lady on the shoreline yelling at him for being out there and taking too big of breaths.
Yeah. Well, there's one I was reading one going back to, and he talked about that. He paddled out. It was a place he had, I think it was in San Francisco the first time he'd gone out there, and he caught a nice wave. And it was one of those things where he didn't know anybody there. So he kind of turned to the two birds and everything, because you guys see my wave, it's like, again, that kind of a thing, just where it was, I knew I couldn't ask anybody. I didn't want to, because you couldn't come in and be that arrogant because you're the newcomer to the place. But he just turned to the birds and it's like, well, did you see that wave?
But to Ryan's point, I think that speaks to this need to be heard, need to have an audience. You have something, I don't know if it's something, and same with us, with our teaching, with our writing,
right,
with our podcast. Is it something we're trying to say, prove, express, communicate, trying to find kindred spirits, a little bit of all of that? And he brings that all back to performance on a wave, which I think is one of those philosophical spots that worked for me, because it kept it in the web.
I agree with you on that. And like I said, knowing it and knowing, like I said, my dad and many, many, many of my dad's friends, I could just these are these guys, this is what they did. They grew up surfing in the 60s and, all the way through. So it just kind of resonates. That's like you said, someone, kindred spirits, someone that could kind of understand what it does and what he's talking about, what it means. So yeah, no, I really enjoyed it. I really enjoyed that adventure part of it. I think if you're want a glimpse into the surfing life, I think like you said, it gives you enough, maybe sometimes too much of that, from just a straight adventure. I think it was a great adventure. Oh, nice.
Tell us what you've got there, Ryan.
What's that new beer there?
Oh, I have what has officially become my favorite Oktoberfest of all time. We're only in the second week of August, and I don't even care. But it's Central Waters Brewing Company out of Amherst, Wisconsin. It's their Oktoberfest lager, and it is as close to a perfect lager as I could imagine.
Wow.
And I don't reach for the lager first. I don't reach for an Oktoberfest first. And I've had 4 or 5 out of the 6-pack now, and every single one has been an experience.
Our discussion has pulled the trigger on my next beer.
Well, while you're grabbing that, I wanted to just touch back on that last point about being heard and about who we're performing for in some instance. And I know that I certainly do this, and I don't know that it's that William Finnegan was surfing to be seen by a specific person or an entity, but maybe in thinking about myself and the things that I do and try to get out into the world, hoping that in some way I'm leaving a mark on the world so that after I am gone, there's some proof of existence, that it meant something somewhere. And I mentioned I grew up very religious. I'm not very religious now, but I think that leaves kind of a hole. And he doesn't talk about religion, so I be curious to know where he falls on this line. But when I was involved in religion, Christianity, Lutheran, growing up, it gives you a lot of answers about what your life means. And when you're not involved in that, you have to decide if your life has meaning for yourself. And so sometimes being seen or leaving your mark or him writing this book or him surfing that perfect wave was a moment on this earth that no one can take away. And he's thinking, maybe this is the thing. And this is me speculating, obviously, but maybe this is the thing that when I'm long gone, that energy of that moment will still exist, because the power of those waves was so great.
So there's a shift. I think you would say, I think you would agree with this. You may not be a religious person now. You just made that assertion, but I would consider you a spiritual person in our discussions about nature, about global concerns, and about our place and our duty there. I see in that same sort of definition, Finnegan resisting his Catholic upbringing, but becoming more spiritual, seeing his role in a global community, his journalism, his civic duty well beyond his city, but global civic duty seems to be his calling, and his surfing seems to be the place where he gets the reflection, the inward part versus the external part of out there doing the journalism in war zones, etc.
I do agree with that. I think Finnegan might call himself spiritual, but I can't say anything that pretentious, Jeff. That's just too much.
That's what I'm here for.
He just said it for you, though. So
my next beer on this same point, based on our discussions, although I hadn't planned on it for today, is called Guilt Lifter.
Oh, I like that one.
Low-cal light version of Four Peaks Kilt Lifter.
Guilt Lifter, yeah.
Guilt Lifter. And I do think there's something of the confessional in this book where he's trying to atone for something. I don't think he could say what, and I don't think I can put my finger on what. It doesn't bother me about the book. I don't see that as a negative. It's a part of the puzzle of the story. And maybe why it ends up being longer than at least 3 readers thought it needed to be.
Yeah.
Well, and I would say that I did try to read this book. I think I read the whole thing once before, and I didn't particularly enjoy it. It felt like I had to go through a similar suffering that the author had to the first time I read it. But I also didn't put it down because I felt like I wanted to get through that. I wanted to experience that. I did enjoy it more this time around. It's been at least 5 or 6 years. I don't know when this came out exactly, but it's been a while since I had read it. And I did enjoy it more this time, going into it preparing myself that this is not the kind of book you sit and you read at the beach and you blow through it in an afternoon or two. Yeah. This is a book that you sit with, that it's got a weight to it, whether you can relate or not. You will experience a similar type of frustration at times, joy at times. You'll experience a lot of those things. And while I'm not sure if that's the goal of a Pulitzer Award, it certainly seems reflective in that it does create emotion.
I enjoyed it much more than Zen and the Art of the Motorcycle Maintenance, which I picked up a couple weeks ago and started rereading and just decided no. I don't know what I have certain books that I hold on to, and I hold on to too many books, but that one has a special spot on the shelf. Well, they got moved. Like, what did I see in this book when I was 20?
Interesting.
But I found this one quite readable. I read most of it on beaches, actually, over the summer, and 40, 50 pages at a sitting. But then I found that I could step away from it for quite a while and just pick it right. It wasn't a book that I thought I'm burning the midnight oil to finish it.
Right.
But I was quite happy every time I got to sit down in peace and knock out 50 pages of it.
Well, I think for me too, on that same thing, and because I am someone that typically will burn through books, but this wasn't one that I think some of that was just stopping to process a little bit more, which I enjoyed because, like I said, it's not often that I find books that make me stop, and most of the books we end up reading seem to be those ones right now. But that stop and make me think a little bit more about what I just read, or hey, maybe I should go back and check on a couple of those, paragraphs or pages to kind of, did I really understand it the way I thought I understood it the first time?
The book works in thirds. The first third's his young life, his family life, his entry into surfing, and the friendships made there, and the direction that takes him. And then we get his travel around the world as probably a man of 20, 21, 22.
Yeah, somewhere in that range.
Really, that was just amazing to me. The type of people that have that ability to pull up all anchors and go. And yes, there's a safety net of family. Thank goodness. I don't want him not to have that safety net.
Right.
But to me, that was just that's when I was just burning through pages. And then the last third is sort of the grown-up him fighting the part of him that doesn't want to accept responsibilities and play safe for his wife and child, and finding the kind of friendships that push him back into those things of danger, and he can't seem to help himself from finding friends like that, the big wave fiends that push him to take risks. But then you find out in his professional life, he's doing the same thing. He's taking the assignments to go work in the Mexican crime families and investigate them, and not the safest line of work. He wrote, but did I surf to scare myself? No. I love the power of the juice, but only to a point. But then everything else he shares seems to belie that, conscious or not. He seems to take the scarier route. And then when he thinks about his body being too old to handle the power of the waves, the kind of surfing he does, his instinct is to just quit. There's like no discussion of mellowing out. Your dad's a older surfer, Jeff.
Right.
I'm guessing
mellow
you
out
have a little bit. And he's not a mellow
totally.
out.
Well, I think we've all done that, and regardless of what our passion is or our hobby is as you get older, you can't do what you did when you were 20 years old, right? You may still like to ride a bike, but you may not be as aggressive as you were when you were 20 years old when you ride a bike. That kind of stuff. So I think that's part of that process.
He never even considers mellowing out and just enjoying surfing. He says, if I don't surf the way I surf, the kind of waves I do, he says it'll leave some sort of quote unquote psychic hole. I don't know what a psychic hole is within him. I thought that was a very different personality type than
Most
me,
definitely.
where I'm starting to embrace my slowing down, taking a walk, listening more carefully. I'm starting to enjoy that sort of stuff. And
stop and smell the roses, right? Isn't that pretty much it?
I don't understand the concept.
No, you're a decade younger than us, though.
That's true. And I appreciate that you brought that up, actually. I am a decade younger. I'm just going to repeat that one more time. No, I actually thought as he got into that last phase of the book where he's talking more about his family relationships and his friendships, in particular with, I think, John Sala, the dancer in Brooklyn, and less about himself, I really enjoyed that more so even than in the beginning. And nothing against the stories about him, but that to me felt like he was growing a little bit and that he was focusing more on these other people's experiences and again, how they reflected, how he was interacting and engaging with them, but also putting the spotlight over here and saying, well, these people had their own journeys and their own lives. And I am now a part of their story as much as the whole first 2/3 was about his story.
Yeah.
And I wrote less notes in that section, but I did enjoy reading it more in the end.
Really, I enjoyed the middle third. Well, the first third, I just zipped. I mean, I'm a teacher. He's talking about his middle school, high school experiences. That's easy reading for me. But that middle third, when he's traveling the world, I guess I wanted the vicarious adventure with him. That was the part. And then that last third, I was like, how much do I need to know about the breaks off San Francisco and hypothermia?
Do you think the traveling the world part had more of an appeal to us now being in a pandemic where I know you guys have done camping and some traveling and stuff, but one thing this feeling I keep falling back on for the last year and a half is that the COVID is the death of spontaneity. This story doesn't happen. It doesn't happen now in general because of all the changes in the world and foreign politics and everything. But just in general, the idea of just going off on a trip and not knowing where you're going or how you're going to get there just seems very exotic to me. It's just not realistic at this point. And so I'm wondering if COVID made this book more appealing or less appealing, or, it could be the other way. You could be more frustrated because, you can't do all these things as easily as we would hope. We were just talking the other day about how, we're able to go to Canada right now, but Canadians can't come here. Right. And so that US passport used to open a lot of doors, and right now it's not necessarily the case.
I do think that the living vicariously through the adventure is especially appealing right now, but I'm a sucker for any place where you're learning about different cultures and people and times, whether it's a time travel fiction book or someone's memoir. So I'm in anyway. You can hook me in on any of those. He did have reflective comments throughout the book, where it's a mellower, I think, older, wiser self. Some of it came with that self-deprecating humor you talked about when he's talking about traveling with Brian, and he's just constantly on Brian's nerves because Brian's a very different personality. He says, I thought he worried too much. He thought I took stupid risks. Neither of us was wrong. That seems to be a moment of, I was a pain in the ass to travel with. But so was he sometimes.
Yeah.
But he was a real buzzkill sometimes.
I feel like we've hit a lull.
Looking through my note. Oh, there was it was page 202 for people taking notes. But there was a funny little, it resonated with me really well. They're reading these books on German literature, German history, and they're looking out into the ocean and at the waves, and he starts seeing German words spelled out in Gothic script in the ocean. And and then his friend Brian starts reading he's reading the same books. They travel with a trunk of books. So I think that's awesome, by the way. They're seeing, and so often when I'm reading something, I see it everywhere. What I'm not necessarily in the words written out in waves, but whatever that author's speaking about, that story that's being told, I see little pieces of it. I think I hear pieces of it everywhere. And I just thought that spoke to someone who likes to read, and then that literature that you're taking inside yourself, you see it back through your eyes out in the world you're living in. I really like that part. And it was just, I guess, something on the spiritual end of things that fit with me. I've left speechless with that.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think I get that. It's like those are things that you never notice, and then you start, whether you're talked about it the day before or whether you read about it or whatever, all of a sudden you start noticing them, right? I think that happens to all of us with different things.
It's like when you come across a new word, you're like, what does that word mean? And then,
and then you hear it, and then all of a sudden everybody's using it. No, that's totally what it is. Or yeah. Well, it'd be like a car. You get a car that you've never seen, and then all of a sudden everybody's got that car. Everywhere I look, I see that car. So
yeah, that's totally true.
Yeah.
So here's my question for you. Then maybe we can go this route. But if you were to say this book if there was a lesson to be learned from this book, because it feels like there should be for as much content as there is, what is that lesson? And I would say I can lead with that by saying he seems to be saying to, one, be willing to push your own boundaries, because we are more likely as humans to sell ourselves short than not. And that is something he has been fighting through his surfing this whole time. But it could be any number of things related to adventure or travel or experience or anything. So what would you think that the lesson would be here? If you were to, I'm walking away from this book, I read 400 untold pages. What should I know?
This is my job. I'm supposed to make kids write a paper on this. I'm supposed to ask that question and hand them a blank paper and say, talk to you in an hour. I would say, as I'm scanning through the collective notes I took, search for self is both external and internal and is never ending. And by never ending, I mean doesn't come with clear answers. It is something I think as a summation of his story, the way he told it, and his reflections on his young life.
I don't know that I could improve on that, actually, to be honest with you. That's pretty much nailed it.
A-.
Yeah.
It goes back to
I agree. I think it's 100% that's what it is. It's that search for self, and it's an ongoing search for self. I mean, even when you think you finally have it, you still don't have it.
Well, you're young. You say, I'm going to go on a journey and I'll find myself. And you come back and go, I wasn't there. I wasn't out there.
Yeah. No, I think you really nailed it. I think that in some ways, and It's even, and even you see through him, through all the stuff he's done, the places he's been and everything else, in his adult life, he's still trying to figure out how to make it all kind of work, to be that parent, to be that husband and be that professional, but he still wants to be, that surfer that's putting himself out in cold weather, danger, big surf, this kind of stuff. And so how do you, it's just that evolution.
Well, he seems to think I don't want to say he seems to think, it seems like he's trying to see a world in which you have to be one or the other. And then by the end, you're realizing you can be all of those things. You don't have to choose necessarily. You can be the person who goes out and has an adventure, and you can also be the husband and the father or the son. And I thought in the end, where he and his mother get closer and he and his father get closer, and they kind of make a reappearance in the book after what seems like, an interminable amount of time in which they weren't a part of his life, that you can have those relationships. And there is something in there about the luxury of time. And it seems like he knows it could have gone the other way, where he could have lost out on those opportunities, but he got lucky. To some extent, and he feels guilty about that luck, but also it exists, and so you shouldn't take advantage of it.
Thinking about all the list of books that he said, I was reading through these books at this time, reading through these books. It was impressive stuff, but they were books of search for self. They were books that would leave you with more questions about who you are and why you are than answers. And it occurs to me now, as you said that, Ryan, that he's someone, and I'm feeling very good about my life right now, because I think I find balance. Sometimes I struggle with him. I'm a cynical person by nature. He really doesn't see or feel or understand or appreciate balance in life the way I've been blessed to. If some of those have been hard earned, but they came eventually. And he seems to still be a person that can't quite be happy with balance.
Well, and maybe that's why I find myself feeling abrasive towards him or towards this book, is because I relate to that too much. I just was telling you before we started this show that I felt stretched pretty thin today, because I've taken on so many different things, and I certainly can relate to this idea that I don't know. Take writing, for example. Writing a new book. I have almost finished the editing on this book that's coming out, and the idea that I have to write a new book afterwards is very daunting. And I question whether or not can I write something interesting if I'm not experiencing something interesting, because I've been inside my house for the last 18 months. Is that possible? What challenges do I have to put in front of me, or what sufferings do I have to go through to come up with an interesting idea? Where I think the reality is you don't need to do any of that. You could just have a good imagination. But he seems to have that feeling too, where he has to go through these things in order to further his art, his relationships, his life experience, to make it worthwhile.
That razor's edge, that's not an interesting life for me. Well, fans of author Ryan Woldt, we sat around Talent's fire pit last Saturday night, and Ryan has plenty of experiences to pull on for future books.
Yes.
He doesn't have to have had anything the last 18 months. He just needs to peek into his journals, pick one, and write a story.
None of that. That was I Googled stories before I came over.
Perfect.
I really like this book. I've already recommended it to other people. I give them the caveat of, when you're into a part of the story you don't like, speed up or skip. But then sink your teeth into the parts of the adventure and the sharing that you enjoy. But I think, the people I've recommended it to, I feel confident 75 or 80% of the book they're going to absolutely love, and find those places to fast forward. Because like a New Yorker magazine article, you think it's over and you flip through and there's 2 more pages, except for in this one.
Yeah, I think that I would be a little less likely to recommend this book to the broad public and be more selective. Just doing some background on the author, he kind of was an initial, besides the New Yorker, he was one of the beginning journalists for Mother Jones, which is a pretty intense magazine as well. And it's an intense book to read. So you have to be a reader. I wouldn't recommend this to somebody who is just who reads to escape or reads to enjoy necessarily. You also have to have this kind of passion for reading to want to get through this.
No, I was just saying I agree with you on that. I think certain things. I've recommended to a handful of people as well already, because I feel like there are parts of the book that they will really appreciate. And I would agree with Jeff on that same thing with that. If you get to areas that are dragging and slow, then kind of speed through those areas, because that's where the commitment would come from being a much, I won't say, someone that's a more dedicated reader is going to get through those parts, right? But yeah, if you're looking for, just that someone that typically reads kind of just fiction, you're going to find some areas of this story might not. The story may not carry through on certain areas. You might say, hey, wait, I was really into this part, but why now are we here,
Well, Jeff referenced it earlier that there's a lot of repetitiveness in the description of the waves. And if you don't care about the surf part or the waves part, you could probably skip about 240 pages and not miss a beat.
Yeah.
And I don't mean that as an insult. I mean that as even though I don't surf, I love the ocean and I love watching waves and I love trying to learn the different waves coming in. And I really liked that part as well. But, you certainly could, as you got through the book and started to get a feel for the rhythm of it, you could, like a wave set, you could skip one every now and again.
Oh, nice.
But that is nicely done, sir.
That's well done.
My friend Bill, who is a surfer, I said, you've got to read this book. He's really interested in surfing lore and surfing legend, and he knew exactly what I was going to say before I said he'd already read it and said he loved it. So I think that's the 100% exception, is if you're into surfing history, both the culture and the nuance of the ocean and every great spot and every great surfer that's ever been around since the 1960s. Oh, this is your book. Well, thank you for choosing it, Jeff. I liked it. I liked it a lot. I thought it was perfect for summertime too, because I did spend I read almost all of it on a beach somewhere.
That's good.
Different beaches. I just thought it was perfect for that. Ryan, it's your choice of books again next month.
So I can tell you, sure. Yeah. If we've already done this book, it's been a long day and I apologize. So you have to let me know. But I've had 2 beers today during this show from my homeland of Wisconsin. And we are in August, which for any football fans know is training camp and preseason. And every training camp, Aaron Rodgers, the quarterback of the greatest football team on earth, the Green Bay Packers, reads The Alchemist by I'm going to butcher it, Paulo Coelho. And I thought that would be a really great, speedy palate cleanser after this deep, intense, long-winded book about surfing.
I'm looking forward to it. And we have not read it.
We have not.
No. Really?
No, we haven't.
I have read it. We have not read it on the show.
Oh, we as a group. I thought I was going to say.
I have read it as well, but it's been a long time. So I remember enjoying it. So I'm looking forward to reading it again and diving.
I've only read it once and I don't remember it, but what I remember is this feeling of just reading something and being like, oh yeah, yes, no. This is the part. Oh no, that part.
So we'll see you in a month for The Alchemist by Paulo Coelho.
Yeah.
Cheers, everybody.
Cheers.